I fried and ate her kidney. Who was Jack the Ripper, and how did he kill the most famous and mysterious maniac in history? Her belly slashed open, her throat cut. This is how Jack the Ripper dispatched his first victim on August 31st, 1888. The killer, whose name later became a byword for terror, held all of London in fear. He became famous not only for his cruelty, but also for his astonishing secrecy. The police never managed to catch him, and only now have researchers been able to lift the veil of mystery and suggest who might have been hiding behind the terrible pseudonym. To this day, people remember the bloody history of the world's most famous maniac. Early in the morning of August 31st, a London cab driver, Charles Cross, was driving through the Whitechapel district. His attention was drawn to something dark lying on the roadside. Approaching closer, Cross realized he had stumbled upon the still warm corpse of an elderly woman. Her throat was cut so deeply that her head was barely attached, and her stomach was slashed open. The detectives who arrived at the scene identified the victim. She was an elderly prostitute named Mary Ann Nichols. The previous evening, she had failed to gather 4 pence for a doss house and was thrown out onto the street. The case was swept under the rug. Respectable people didn't venture into the impoverished Whitechapel, where power belonged to gangs, so news of another prostitute's murder didn't impress anyone. Not long before, the mutilated bodies of Emma Smith and Martha Tabram, also prostitutes, had been found in these slums, but killed under different circumstances. The first had been gang raped, and the second had been literally hacked with a knife. The pathologist counted 39 stab wounds. Soon, however, detectives had to return to the troubled district. Not far from where Nichols was killed, vagrants found the body of another woman, yet another prostitute with a slashed belly and a cut throat. But something distinguished this murder from the previous one. The woman's intestines were thrown over her shoulders, and the autopsy at the morgue revealed that after death, the victim's uterus had been removed. The criminal was forming his signature modus operandi. The second consecutive brutal murder caused unrest in the city. It turned out that Scotland Yard had long suspected that a serial killer had appeared in London. It wasn't just the modus operandi. An envelope with a ring and money was found not far from the corpse. The murderer was making it clear that he was committing the crime not for gain, but for other motives. 3 detective inspectors were immediately assigned to the investigation: Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore, and Walter Andrews. The day after the latest murder in Whitechapel, the newspaper Star devoted its entire front page to a small article with a huge headline: "Another horrible murder in Whitechapel." Other publications instantly picked up the sensation. Someone spread a rumor that the murders were part of Jewish witchcraft rituals. The fact was that a significant part of the district's population were Jews, refugees and immigrants fleeing pogroms occurring in the Russian Empire. Similar anti-Semitic unrest gripped London. Under public pressure, the police arrested John Pizer, a Polish Jew who had been a suspect in the first murder. But the man had an ironclad alibi for the team of both crimes, and he was soon released. On September 27th, a letter addressed to the director arrived at the Central News Agency. "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I'm down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. The postscript read, "Don't mind me giving the trade name. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Jack did not keep them waiting long, and 3 days later, on the night of September 30th, committed another, now double murder, again attacking street prostitutes. The mutilated bodies of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were quickly found. They were on parallel streets, and, as the medical examiner determined, Eddowes was killed less than 10 minutes before her body was found. The criminal was clearly in a hurry and agitated. This was indicated by the fact that the injuries on Stride's corpse were limited to a cut throat. However, the second victim was disfigured worse than the previous one. Jack mutilated her face, completely removed her intestines and wrapped them around her right shoulder and cut out a kidney. All this took him between 3 and 5 minutes. Then the maniac escaped from possible pursuers through alleys, which he clearly knew well, managed to wash his hands and knife in a rainwater tank, and also wrote a provocative message in chalk on the wall of one of their houses. "The Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing." Confirmation of authorship became a piece of the bloodied apron of one of the victims. The next morning, all London newspapers printed Jack the Ripper's letter and the terrible reports of numerous reporters. The panic that had already gripped the city took on paranoid forms. Fuel was added to the fire by the Saucy Jackie postcard, which was also published the day after the murder. In it, the maniac allowed himself to gloat. But it soon turned out that the investigation had its first witness. A cab driver passing by during one of the murders remembered the general features of the killer. Tall, strong build, long chestnut hair. Later, he lamented that he hadn't seen the Ripper's face because, as luck would have it, the street lamps weren't lit. And while prostitutes were afraid to go out on the streets and doctors locked their medical bags in safes, pathologist Frederick Brown stated that the killer might be a doctor, since quickly cutting out a kidney in the dark is only possible if you know where it is. The police staged a massive raid on Whitechapel. The result of the raid was disappointing. Several smugglers, pickpockets, and robbers fell into the hands of the law, but the Ripper remained at large. Arrests continued. In October 1888 alone, the police interrogated over 2,000 and arrested 80 people, but the investigators did not come one step closer to solving the case. London awaited a new murder. The tense calm was broken by a letter received on October 15th by George Lusk, a member of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of volunteers patrolling the district. The message read, "From hell, Mr. Lusk, so I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you to the piece I fried and ate it was very means. I may send you the bloody myth that took it out if you only want a while longer. Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." But there was no Jack the Ripper signature on the letter, and it was written with numerous errors. Therefore, the forgery was quickly exposed. There were many such attempts to impersonate the maniac by sending letters in his name. Probably some newspapermen were trying to boost sales of their publications this way. But there were no new murders, so the public calmed down slightly. And then, on November 9th, 1888, news of the mutilated body of another girl again shook London and its surroundings. The victim's name was Mary Jane Kelly, a young, unlike the other victims, red-haired Irish prostitute rented a room in a lodging house. The last person to see her alive was the landlady. The night before, at 2 a.m, Mary went to her apartment with some respectable-looking gentlemen. The landlady remembered that the man was dressed all in black. A thick gold chain hung from his waistcoat, and long chestnut hair was visible from under his hat. The next morning, the landlady knocked on Mary's door. She was collecting rent that day, but the lock was not latched. Peeking into the room, the landlady screamed in horror and rushed to find the police. One of the constables, the first to arrive on the scene, fainted as soon as he opened the door. The body was mutilated beyond recognition, breasts cut off, internal organs removed and scattered around the room, face cut to shreds, thigh muscles separated from the bones. On the same day, the chief of the Metropolitan Police, Charles Warren, resigned. Constables were brought to London from nearby settlements because street patrols were conducted around the clock. 143 detectives arrived in the British capital to help their colleagues find any clues. But it was all in vain. Some law enforcement officers began to hope for a new murder, hoping that one day the maniac would guaranteed make a mistake. But all was quiet, and a couple of months later, Scotland Yard made an official and absolutely unconvincing statement. Jack the Ripper had either committed suicide or gone insane, and was locked up for life in a madhouse. The identity of the beast. The mystery of the killer's identity still haunts researchers. Already in the 1920s, communities of Ripperologists began to appear. Associations of journalists, historians, detectives, and others interested in solving the Ripper mystery. They collected disparate facts and conspiracy theories. For example, in 1959, publicist William Le Queux published the book Things I Know. The author claimed that in his youth, he ended up in Russia after the February Revolution and befriended the chairman of the provisional government, Alexander Kerensky. Therefore, he allowed the journalist to rummage through secret archives. There, he came across the diaries of Grigory Rasputin, a close associate of Nicholas II, which stated that Jack the Ripper's real name was Alexander Pedachenko, and he was sent to England by the Tsarist intelligence to sabotage the British public's trust in the police. Having completed his task, Pedachenko returned to his native Tver, but was later shot. This is not the only crazy theory put forward by Ripperologists. The murders in Whitechapel were attributed to Vincent van Gogh, claiming that the painting Irises actually depicts the outline of Mary Kelly's corpse, and even to writer Lewis Carroll. The accusation against the author of Alice in Wonderland was based on Carroll's handwriting being similar to that of the person who called himself Jack the Ripper in the letters. However, it is still unknown whether the killer was the real author of these letters. Fortunately, no one paid much attention to such claims. But when Professor of History Thomas Stowell put forward his own hypothesis about the Ripper's identity, a real scandal erupted. In 1962, he published an article stating that the Duke of Clarence, Queen Victoria's grandson, was guilty of the murders. Stowell claimed to have accidentally discovered confirmation of this in the personal notes of the Queen's physician. The Duke's motive for the crimes was the birth of a bastard from a pauper in Whitechapel and to hide one murder, the child's murder. 5 more were committed. Stowell's information was backed by his authority, so representatives of Buckingham Palace had to officially refute his words. This only added fuel to the fire. But soon, journalists who began checking the facts presented in the article found out that on September 30th, 1888, the day of the double murder, the prince was at his father's birthday celebration in Scotland. There was much evidence and confirmation of this. An interesting study was conducted by forensic expert Ian Finlay. He examined genetic material and handwriting from Jack's letters and concluded that the killer was a woman. Finlay even named a name, Mary Piercy. She was convicted and hanged for murdering her lover's wife. The girl cut her rival's throat from ear to ear, which, in the forensic expert's opinion, proves her involvement in the Whitechapel slaughter. But the two most plausible theories about the Ripper's identity are associated with the names of Sir John Williams and Aaron Kosminski. The first was a famous London surgeon. Journalist Leonard Matters suspected him after the murders ceased. He found out that Williams had long practiced at a clinic on Harley Street, located near Whitechapel. He often performed abortions for prostitutes there, wore black, and had immense knowledge of anatomy. Immediately after the last murder, Williams hastily moved to Wales, where he founded the National Library. The surgeon died in 1926. In 2001, his descendant Tony, studying his ancestors' archives, found a record that he had performed an abortion on Mary Kelly, the maniac's last victim. And old pages with entries for 1888 were torn out, despite all the others being preserved in excellent condition. Another piece of evidence of the surgeon's guilt was a 30-centimeter surgical knife and preserved fragments of female uteruses. Tony believes the motive for the crime was the infertility of Sir John's wife. He could have been taking revenge on prostitutes who came to him for abortions for his grief and inability to become a father. Kosminski, on the contrary, was one of the main suspects from the very beginning of the official investigation. Aaron was an almost destitute Polish-Jewish immigrant, tormented by hallucinations and fits of rage. But the constables found no substantial evidence against him, so Kosminski remained free. 6 months after the 5th murder, he was forcibly sent to a mental asylum with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, where he spent the rest of his life. New evidence of his guilt was found only in this century. First, Dr. Jari Luhelainen, a DNA expert, conducted an analysis of biomaterial left on Catherine Eddowes' shore. The doctor compared the found DNA samples with samples from Kosminski's descendants and announced that they matched by 99.2%. In early 2019, his research was confirmed by scientists from Liverpool, John Moores University. Perhaps someday there will be new clues and solutions in the case of the uncaptured killer. But now it seems a neat period has been put in the question: who is Jack the Ripper?